Breaking news this morning, the Associated Press is reporting that Albertsons has decided to not go ahead with the Kroger merger. Albertsons accuses it of failing to overcome government objections to the deal. This news comes one day after the $24.6 billion business deal was put on pause by two states, Oregon and Washington.
This is huge news for multiple states, including right here in Colorado. Our 90s legal expert Whitney Traylor is on the phone with us now. Whitney, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Corey and Jordan and Colorado.
Talk to us a little bit about how this went down, Whitney.
Yeah, well, I wasn't necessarily surprised. So what happened was the two courts, right, there were a number of courts suing to try and prevent this merger because their contention was this would violate antitrust law because they would get so big, Kroger and Albertsons together, that they would drive out competition. So there were a number of lawsuits trying to prevent that. Yesterday, two courts, Washington and Oregon, ruled essentially putting the merger on pause. So the court said, no, we're going to go through some more steps. It wasn't completely over, but it was a huge roadblock. So now this morning, we wake up, excuse me, everybody, and we see that Albertsons has terminated the merger, and now they're suing, alleging actually a breach of contract and a covenant of good faith and fair dealing. So essentially Albertsons is saying, hey, Kroger, you didn't do enough to make this thing go through. And they're saying that it was because you didn't do enough in response to the regulators in terms of divesting more companies to make the deal go through. So they're saying it was your fault. Kroger in response is saying, no, it was actually Albertsons' fault, so I'll expect a counterclaim very soon.
So Albertsons is accusing Kroger of not doing all they could to secure regulatory approval for the merger, of not acting in good faith. How can they prove that in a court of law?
Right. So what they're going to do now, and this is just kind of like every case, you're going to start to see the contract will certainly come into play, and then you're going to start to see the emails and the correspondence between them. And one of the issues, Albertsons is saying, look, the regulators came and said, in order for this to pass, muster and not be anti-competitive, you need to get rid of some of your stores. Mm-hmm. And so what they had proposed was, okay, we'll sell 500 of our stores to C&S Wholesale. Well, they're the owners of Piggly Wiggly, but they only own 29 stores. And so people were saying they can't handle 500 stores. It's not a legitimate, transfer. It won't be really competitive. And so Albertsons is saying, Kroger, you should have done more when the regulators said, hey, you need to do more. So we're going to see this play out in court. I'm sure there's going to be counterclaims, and this will be serious litigation because the termination fee just for, Albertsons is saying, Kroger, you owe us this $600 million just because we're now terminating the merger because of your actions.
Well, Whitney, this is on top of both companies already spending $1 billion in legal fees trying to even get this merger to happen. Do you see this as Albertsons trying to make up for the money that they lost now that isn't happening?
Yes, I think that is exactly what's happening. They spent so much money, and if they can point the finger, and of course, Kroger's pointing the finger back, and so I think Albertsons just got the jump on them. And sometimes that is a litigation advantage, is if you can file first and get on the offensive first. But they'll both be suing each other. But importantly, another part of this was that Albertsons can now also pursue other partners. So they can still go forward with a merger. And what's going to be interesting is the Biden administration was very aggressive on their antitrust. They didn't like these big mergers. The Trump administration, we already know he's very anti-regulation, and now he's bringing all these business people in to essentially run the government. I suspect Albertsons is seeing the writing on the wall and saying, look, we'll be able to go forward with somebody else, and there's going to be less government resistance. So I suspect that's going to be part of what happens in the near future.
Whitney, one last question for you. I think that there's a question about what happens with the Colorado case. Attorney General Phil Weiser, of course, a big part of this. Does this just dissolve? What happens with that?
Yeah, that's this case will essentially become moot. Now, I don't know if and that is a legal term of art. It's moot now because they were suing to prevent the merger. The merger is now, not going through. And that was an issue that I had from the beginning because this was supposed to be a national merger, and there were a number of different lawsuits. both federally and in state courts, including here in Colorado, as you just mentioned. And so the question was, well, if they lose in one state but win everywhere else, will they still go forward with the merger because it was a national merger? And I don't think they would have, because I don't think they could have carved out a state here and a state there to make it work. So this case will be moot. I suspect the parties will dismiss it, and then maybe there'll be an issue about attorney fees and things like that. But yeah, and I also think the people have spoken. It was abundantly clear that the majority of people seem to be against this merger, and I do personally believe it would have been difficult on the consumers. I think it would have led to stores closing, especially in rural areas, leaving people with no real options. So I think this is good news for the consumer.
All right. This is obviously major breaking news happening this morning. 9 News legal analyst Whitney Traylor with us on the phone. Whitney, thank you for helping us understand the latest development.
All right. You're welcome, and good to see you. You guys look great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.